Hello students, my name is Deepta Vivekanand and I'm going to talk to you about Albert Einstein at school, an excerpt from Young Einstein written by well-known biographer Patrick Pringle. That's chapter number 4 of Snapshots, the NCERT supplementary reader for class 11 English core. This is part 1. In this podcast, we will learn a little bit about the author. We'll discuss how Einstein felt about the school that he went to, his clash with many of his teachers, and his approach to learning. We will also analyze the story and draw parallels between Einstein's schooling years and the current education system. First, let's talk about Patrick Pringle. He was born in 1917 in London, and he has authored several popular books including The Jolly Roger, Highwaymen and The Young Dickens. He is known for his sharp analytical writing of non-fiction and his well-researched biographies. Here students, I must point out to you that you will find another Lawrence Patrick Pringle mentioned on internet searches and websites that help you with notes. Now, this Lawrence Patrick Pringle is a wildlife biologist and author of many books on science, so please do not confuse the two authors. They are entirely different people. We are concerned with Patrick Pringle and not Lawrence Patrick Pringle, so I hope that's clear. Right, so now before we begin, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Have you ever felt trapped inside the classroom? Have you felt as if your creative abilities cannot be expressed fully in the classroom? Have you wished you could just study your favorite subject and drop the rest? Have you felt bored and sleepy in some classes? Have you ever asked your teacher, or at least felt like asking your teacher, "But why should I learn this?" Have you ever thought to yourself, "I wish I didn't have to go to school every day"? I can sense some of you nodding your heads vigorously and saying yes. Well then, this story is sure to keep you interested, for it is in many ways your story too. The story begins with young Einstein's encounter with his history teacher, Mr. Braun, at the Luitpold Gymnasium in Munich, where he was a student. Students, please turn to page 25 of your reader. I shall be reading out a small portion of the conversation between Einstein and Mr. Braun. "In what year, Einstein, did the Prussians defeat the French at Waterloo?" asked Mr. Braun. "I don't know, sir." "Why don't you know? You've been told it often enough." "I must have forgotten." "Did you ever try to learn?" asked Mr. Braun. "No, sir," Albert replied with his usual unthinking honesty. "Why not?" "I can't see any point in learning dates. One can always look them in a book." Mr. Braun was speechless for a few moments. "You amaze me, Einstein," he said at last. "Don't you realize that one can always look most things up in books? That applies to all the facts you learn at school." "Yes, sir." "Then I suppose you don't see any point in learning facts." "Frankly, sir, I don't," said Albert. "Then you don't believe in education at all?" "Oh, yes, sir, I do. I don't think learning facts is education." The teacher is enraged and asks Einstein to speak about the theory of education. An embarrassed Einstein goes on to give a little speech to the class about what education should include and that what they are being taught is irrelevant. I want to ask you, dear students, do you think that some of the things you've been asked to learn are irrelevant to your lives? Yes, I'm sure. I felt that way too when I was in school. Some things just didn't make any sense. Anyway, so this episode with his teacher affected Einstein deeply. He resolved not to go back to school, but then he knew his father would never agree to his leaving before he finished his diploma. Einstein's parents now lived in Milan, Italy, while he stayed in Munich, in a small room in one of the poorest parts of the city. While school didn't cheer him up much, his place of lodging made him even more miserable. He didn't mind the bad food or the dirt and squalor, but it was the people around him that he disliked the most. They were noisy, violent, and rowdy, constantly getting into fights. His landlady was a rude woman too. Whenever Einstein played his violin, which was his comfort other than science, his landlady asked him to stop, saying, "That wailing gets on my nerves." Now Einstein had a friend, Yuri, who was a source of solace. So he decided to talk to Yuri about his predicament. He also spoke to his cousin Elsa, who once visited him from Berlin. She advised him not to think about his subjects too much. Now, if you'll go to page 27, students, I'll read out this very interesting conversation between Elsa and Einstein. I'll be reading from the 8th line, so if you can just quickly find it. Right. "You don't have to understand what you're taught, just be able to repeat it in the exams." "That's the whole trouble," said Albert. "I'm no good at learning things by heart." "You don't need to be good at it. Anyone can learn like a parrot. You just don't try. And yet I always see you with a book under your arm," added Elsa. "What is the one that you're reading?" "A book on geology." "Geology? Rocks and things. Do you learn that?" "No, we have hardly any science at school." "Then why are you studying it?" "Because I like it. Isn't that a good enough reason?" Elsa sighed. "You're right, of course, Albert," she said, "but it won't help with your diploma." So, students, do you think this is true for many of you as well? What is your opinion on rote learning? Do you think real learning happens when you memorize and reproduce the same words in your textbook? Let me tell you something about Einstein. When he was very young, Einstein's parents worried that he had a learning disability because he was very slow to learn to talk. But when he started school, it turned out that he did very well. He was a creative and persistent problem solver. But he hated the rote, disciplined style of the teachers at his Munich school. And eventually he dropped out when he was 15. However, he struggled to get into a polytechnic school in Zurich after flunking his entrance exam in botany, zoology, and language, except maths, which he did very well in. He managed to get in the next year, but he continued to struggle. His professors thought that he was smart, but they felt he was too self-absorbed, and some even doubted that he would graduate. He barely managed to graduate and found himself working in the Swiss patent office instead of at a school or a university. So what does that tell you about Einstein's mind? Was he a poor student? Or was the system just not able to give him what he wanted? Do systems of education mostly still operate the same way? A lot of things for you to think about. Now, coming back to the lesson. After about 6 months, Einstein decided enough was enough. He made up his mind to leave the school. He came up with a plan. He spoke to Yuri and said he would pretend to have a nervous breakdown so that a doctor could give him a medical certificate declaring him unfit for school. He asked Yuri to find a friendly doctor who'd oblige. Well, Yuri managed to find a Dr. Ernest Weil, someone who had graduated from medical school just the previous week and had just set up his practice. Yuri also warned Einstein not to lie to the doctor, but confess why he needed the certificate. This is end of part 1.